something pretty disturbing happened in Circleville, starting small and flourishing over decades. Residents began to receive letters that accused the citizens of being involved in some pretty terrible things: embezzlement, domestic violence, affairs, and even murder.
The Circleville letter writer knew everything about everyone and knew everyone's secrets.
They were vicious and ugly. Somebody with some severe psychological problems, I would hazard to guess.
The threatening anonymous letters kept coming, hundreds of them. Most were postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, about 30 miles north, which is where I grew up and where I was living in March of 1977. When small-town Circleville began to feel under siege, when just a walk to the mailbox could trigger terror, especially in the case of one woman who lived here, a school bus driver by the name of Mary Gillespie.
Mary Gillespie goes out to her mailbox. She receives a letter. She opens it. It's an anonymous letter, distinct handwriting, and it's telling her to end the affair with the superintendent of the school there, Gordon Massey.
Mrs. Gillespie, stay away from Massey. I've been observing your house, and I know you have children.
It's your daughter's turn to pay for what you've done. I shall come out there and put a bullet in that little girl's head. These letters were being sent to newspapers, elected officials, private citizens.
And they're all saying the same thing, that basically Gordon Massey, the superintendent, he needs to be exposed, he needs to be fired. Her husband, Ron, begins to receive them as well.
Mr. Gillespie, your wife is seeing Gordon Massey. You should catch them together and kill them both. He doesn't deserve to live.
Well, he got letters saying that if he didn't do something about this affair, his life would be in danger.
We know what kind of car you drive. We know where your kids go to school.
By August of 1977, everything changes when Ron Gillespie gets a call late one night. Enraged, he picks up a gun, gets in his truck, and drives off.
And told the daughter that he was going to confront the letter writer. He was traveling at a high speed, lost control of the truck, went off the road, hit a tree, and was killed. The letter writer had made threats to Ron Gillespie that he could end up dead. Then he ended up dead.
Was Ron Gillespie's death an accident, or was he murdered?
Murdered.
This case has really left its mark.
Yeah, and it's destroyed a lot of people.
I think there was a big cover-up.
Turned out to be quite a mystery.
Do you think you know who wrote those anonymous letters?
Yes, I do.
Circleville, Ohio has the look and feel of a quaint Midwestern town.
In many ways, it's sort of an all-American town. Still has a pretty rural character to it, and some families have been there for decades.
Its major attraction, says journalist Martin Yant, is the annual pumpkin show.
Let's give him a big hand of applause, guys.
Well, it was a good place to live. Fairly peaceful till all this stuff started.
Janet Cassidy is talking about that barrage of anonymous poison pen letters that began arriving in mailboxes all over Circleville in 1977.
Small towns have big secrets, buried deep under those freshly mowed lawns.
It caught the attention of Marie Mayhew, who researched the story for her podcast, Whatever Remains.
This anonymous author was hell-bent to expose every little ugly secret in Circleville.
At first, the writer seemed fixated on the married school district superintendent.
Gordon Massey was a well-thought-of man in Circleville.
And his rumored relationship with the school bus driver.
Mary Gillespie was a wife and a mother. They were accusing her of adultery.
You've got the superintendent possibly having an affair with a school bus driver? Wasn't that kind of the talk of town?
Yeah, it was. Definitely.
June Whitehead grew up in Pickaway County with her sister Janet.
Have you seen Mary's picture? She was Miss Jackson.
She looks really attractive there.
Yes, she was.
Mary married her high school sweetheart, Ron Gillespie.
And you wouldn't find a better person than Ronnie Gillespie.
The couple had 2 children and settled in Circleville. I mean, this had to be very awkward for Mary Gillespie, for her children, for Gordon Massey, for his wife, for his son.
It must have been awful. I mean, it was just sort of this all-invasive poison. There was nobody that was off limits to this letter writer.
And it wasn't just a campaign of letters. There were phone calls and offensive signs that began appearing along Mary's bus route.
Ron would have to go out, and he would have to find and pick up all the signage about his wife and kids around Circleville.
Determined to stop the writer, the Gillespies brought their letters to the sheriff's office.
There was an ongoing investigation. They were tapping phones. They were watching houses. They tried to work with the USPS to check the mail.
But the letters continued, and small-town Circleville was consumed with speculation. Was the writer male or female? Did the writer live in town? Then, in August 1977, Mary left her husband and children at home and drove to Florida with her sister-in-law.
Ron had told her he knew who the letter writer was, and he was going to take care of this problem while they were in Florida.
They were en route when they learned that Ron had crashed his truck into a tree after getting that mysterious phone call. The coroner ruled his death an accident, but Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, believed he had been murdered.
Although a number of people told me that he was not a heavy drinker, he had almost twice the legal limit of alcohol in his blood.
Also suspicious, under Ron's body, police found a .22 caliber revolver.
The gun had been fired once, so then the question was he shooting at the letter writer? The sheriff didn't give that any credence at all.
But Paul Freshour kept pushing the Pickaway County Sheriff to take a closer look. Pam Stanton was close to the Freshours.
He wanted the truth about Ron's death. He wanted to know who was writing the letters, too.
The attacks on Mary Gillespie and Gordon Massey didn't stop. Now letters were also being sent to local businesses, government offices, schools, and people who lived in the area.
This person was, at that point, pretty unbound, not afraid to say anything. And it scared a lot of people. You know, is he coming after me or is she coming after me?
Mary had always denied having an affair with Massey, but after Ron's death, she says they began seeing each other. And that's when the threats against her became even more vicious.
Everyone knows what you have done. If you don't believe us, just make them mad and find out for yourself.
Robin Yoakum writes mysteries, but back in the early 1980s, he was a crime reporter for the Columbus Dispatch.
There were obscenities and threats to do harm to Mrs. Gillespie's daughter. It's your daughter's turn to pay for what you've done.
On February 7th, 1983, Mary Gillespie was driving her empty school bus heading to pick up kids. It's 3:30 p.m. She's about to turn left here on 5 Points Pike when she looks over there and sees a handmade sign on a fence. It talks about her 13-year-old daughter, and it's obscene. So she pulls the bus over here, but when she goes over there to try to pull the sign off the fence, she realizes that it's rigged to twine in a box. She says she takes that box home. She then opens it and gets a shocking surprise.
It was a gun, and it was ready to go off.
When Mary brought the box to the sheriff's office, investigators quickly realized it was a booby trap. Yoakum was in the newsroom when word got out.
And I remember the excitement. From a newspaper perspective, it's a great story. A woman who had been the target of all these letters finds a booby trap with a .25 caliber handgun rigged to it. All reporters would want to cover that story.
Especially if there was a dramatic twist. And when did Paul Freshour become the suspect?
Pretty quickly.
There's small town intrigue. A seemingly omnipresent, unknown villain extracting revenge on the people of Circleville by uncovering their secrets. A mysterious death, an elaborate attempted murder.
To this day, there's a fierce debate about who that villain is or was. So we'll take you back through the evidence and the theories, and you could decide. This sounds like something out of an Agatha Christie novel, doesn't it?
It does. There's a cast of characters, the letters would keep coming, and then the inevitable attempted murder, but it is very much an Agatha Christie feel to it.
And just like one of Christie's mysteries, the gun found in the booby trap provided the first clue. Firearm examiners at BCI, Ohio's Bureau of Criminal Investigation, were able to restore the partially filed off serial number.
And when they traced the gun, it came to a co-worker of Paul's. He said, yeah, I sold that to Paul Freshour.
On the surface, says Martin Yant, it was shocking because Paul Freshour and his wife Karen Sue had been close to Mary Gillespie and her late husband Ron, Karen Sue's brother.
It was kind of an extended family that seemed to socialize together.
But by 1983, when sheriff's investigators went to talk to Karen Sue, the Freshours were in the midst of a contentious divorce.
Karen Sue gave them quite an earful.
She told investigators that Paul had become infuriated with Mary.
Karen said that Paul had thought the world of Ron and Mary before Ron died. But after his death, Paul hated Mary, hated her over the Massey deal.
And then Karen Sue told them that her estranged husband was behind Circleville's anonymous letters.
She had found one letter torn up in a commode, and she had found a couple of other letters hidden in the house.
When investigators went to see Paul Freshour, Marie Mayhew says he was very cooperative. Did he demand to have a lawyer?
No, he answered all of their questions.
And readily admitted the gun belonged to him.
Well, they asked him how the gun ended up in the booby trap, and he said, I don't know.
Freshour told investigators his gun had been stolen weeks earlier and allowed them to search his house and his car. He even gave them samples of his handwriting.
It definitely does seem like he has absolutely nothing to hide at that point.
He denied being the letter writer and said he had nothing to do with the booby trap, but he failed a polygraph, so Paul Freshour was arrested for the attempted murder of Mary Gillespie. Were you surprised when he was charged with attempted
Yes.
murder?
Yes. Yeah, I was.
This was the man Pam Stanton called Uncle Paul, and says their families were so close, she thought of him as a second father.
I mean, was he worried? His life was on the line, his freedom. Yeah, he was scared anybody would be.
Freshour was never charged with sending any of the threatening, harassing letters, but in Circleville, there was an assumption that the letter writer was finally behind bars. On October 24, 1983, Paul Freshour went on trial at the Pickaway County Courthouse in Circleville.
It was a big deal.
Robin Yoakum didn't cover the trial, but he followed all the news coverage.
You know, he was the mastermind behind this alleged booby trap, but almost everything focused on the letters.
First up was the intended victim, Mary Gillespie. She testified about finding the booby trap, and then, over defense objections, she was asked about the anonymous letters she had received. How damaging was that to Paul Freshour at his trial?
That was very, very damaging.
The defense argued there was no direct threat to Mary's life in the letters, so they weren't relevant to the case, but the judge allowed in 39 of them. It was a break for the prosecution, who claimed the writing on the booby trap shared similarities to those letters.
The letter and the writing that was on the 2x4 was the same block handwriting, sort of the same cadence and the same message as the anonymous letter writer.
The state brought in the BCI handwriting analyst who compared the writing on the booby trap to the letters sent to Mary and then to samples of Paul Freshour's handwriting.
They had handwriting analyses that indicated that the letters could have been written by Paul Freshour.
And a second expert, originally a defense witness, agreed. I mean, that's pretty damaging, isn't it? When a witness hired by the defense ends up testifying for the prosecution?
I can only imagine it was something you'd want to avoid.
It was far more difficult for the prosecution to prove Freshour made the booby trap. Was Paul Freshour's fingerprints found on the gun or the box that held the gun?
No. And they didn't have a whole lot of evidence about the booby trap other than he admitted that was his gun.
There was circumstantial evidence. Freshour had taken the day off from work the same day the booby trap was found. And that box that held the gun, an industrial-sized chalk box like this one, was easily found at Anheuser-Busch, where Paul worked.
They had his gun in the booby trap, and they had the chalk box, so they thought they had plenty of evidence.
But no one saw Freshour near the booby trap.
He had a pretty good alibi for most of the day.
Paul Freshour didn't take the stand, but multiple defense witnesses testified to seeing him at home. He was having work done on his house, the reason he said he took the day off.
As the trial progressed, I'm thinking, a lot of this stuff just doesn't add up. You know, where are the fingerprints? Where's the physical evidence?
But it was enough evidence for the jurors. They found Paul Freshour guilty of attempted murder. How did you hear the verdict? Even after all this time, it's still hard, isn't it?
I got home, and everybody was just a basket case. They were crying, everybody was upset.
He received the maximum sentence, 7 to 25 years in prison. When Paul Freshour was convicted, did everybody in town breathe this sigh of relief? The letter writer is caught. It's over.
I think that's a fair assessment. They've linked him to the letters. They linked him to the booby trap. We're going to get this guy out of our community, get him in prison. Everything will kind of go back to normal. Except it didn't, because the letters never stopped. Paul was living a pretty good life, had never had any problems with the law. Basically, he lost everything. Lost his home, lost his job, went to prison.
It was inconceivable to Paul Freshour's family and friends that the man they so admired could be convicted of attempted murder.
It's just preposterous. There's no way.
He wasn't dumb enough to put his own gun in a booby trap. And anybody could have gotten that gun.
And even today, former investigative journalists Martin Yant and Robin Yoakum question whether Freshour's verdict was fair.
Can I tell you, I'm not 100% sure that he didn't do it? No, I can't. But I can tell you, had I been sitting on that jury, I would have never sent a guy to prison based on that flimsy evidence.
The more I got involved in the case, the more I saw there were just too many question marks.
At trial, the prosecution had branded Paul Freshour the Circleville letter writer. But once he was locked up, how did menacing anonymous letters keep coming?
I'm not talking about one or two letters. There were hundreds of letters that went out after he was in prison.
The Pickaway County Sheriff couldn't say how Freshour was able to write and send those letters, but he was certain Paul was responsible. The prison warden disagreed.
His warden insisted that would be impossible. They kept him in isolation. They did not allow him to have pens or paper.
He was strip searched. All his incoming and outgoing mail was inspected. There is absolutely, positively no way Paul Freshour was writing those letters and smuggling them out from prison. No way.
After Yoakum and Yant wrote articles about Paul Freshour, they also received letters, and inexplicably, so did Paul Freshour, behind bars.
The letter writer bragged about setting him up. He said, when we set him up good.
And who did Paul think had set him up?
Karen Sue,
His ex-wife.
his ex-wife.
Paul Freshour's lawyer raised that very possibility during his closing argument. Who hated Paul enough to try to get him into trouble? If you read the divorce decree, who stands to profit financially if Paul is convicted, goes to prison? Pam Stanton says that during that divorce battle, Karen Sue lost her home, custody of their daughters, and was living in a trailer on Mary Gillespie's property.
If Uncle Paul's out of the picture, she got it all.
And Karen Sue was one of the first to link Paul to the anonymous letters. Remember, she told investigators that she found some at their home, including that one in the commode.
Karen tried to piece it back together when Paul was not at home and said she could make the name of Gillespie out on the letter.
Could she show them these letters?
No, she didn't keep the letters.
Does that make sense?
Not to me. Why wouldn't she run off right away to the sheriff's office and say, look, this is from my husband, he's the letter writer? She didn't do any of that until after the booby trap was found.
Do you believe that Paul Freshour did set up the booby trap and tried to kill Mary Gillespie?
Nope, I don't. I think somebody stole his gun to set him up, and it worked.
In the early 1990s, when Martin Yant began investigating Freshour's case, he discovered evidence in police reports of an alternate suspect.
There was another bus driver who saw what I think is very significant. It was something that never came up at trial, and it points in a whole different direction.
Investigators never followed up, but Yant did. The female bus driver told him that 20 minutes before Mary found that booby trap, she had driven by the same spot.
She said she saw a man standing beside an El Camino,
That looked like this one.
but the man turned away from her and acted like he was going to the bathroom, so she didn't get a good look at him.
The description didn't seem to match Paul Freshour.
She said he was a large man with sandy hair, and Paul was not large, and he had very dark hair.
And wasn't Karen Sue at that point dating a man who was large with sandy hair?
Yes,
And what about the El Camino?
there's no evidence that any inquiries were made about who might have an El Camino.
Didn't, in fact, Karen Sue's brother have an El Camino?
That's what I've been told.
But Marie Mayhew believes trying to connect the booby trap to Karen Sue is tenuous at best.
There's someone who looked like the man she was dating driving a car that looked like it could have been her brother's. None of that points back to Karen Sue. I don't believe that she framed her husband for this or was responsible for it.
10 years after Paul Freshour went to prison, the intrigue surrounding the case caught the attention of the television series Unsolved Mysteries. But in December 1993, before filming even began, the show received a postcard with an ominous threat.
Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you El Sickos will pay. The Circleville writer.
It didn't deter the show from going to Circleville. Even Paul Freshour, who had just been released on parole, agreed to talk.
I'd really like to see someone really look at this case on the letters. Reopen the letter part of it and get in and find out who wrote the letters.
Pam Stanton says Karen Sue was not happy that Unsolved Mysteries was in town, or that Pam agreed to be interviewed.
I got a phone call and her telling me it would be in my best interest not to go.
Karen Sue didn't participate in the program, but according to Pam, she kept track of everyone who did.
She sat in a car on the other side of the intersection and took pictures of everybody going in and out for the interviews.
If true, Marie Mayhew says that doesn't prove anything. What's more, Karen Sue has never been considered a suspect by police.
I think she's a very convenient villain.
We reached out to her, but she did not respond to our request for an interview.
There are so many twists and turns in this case. All of a sudden, something will surface, makes you rethink what you were thinking.
Martin Yant is right, and there's another twist to come.
After Paul Freshour went to prison, how do you think the letters continued?
It took nearly 20 years, but in 1994, the Circleville Letters abruptly stopped when Paul Freshour was released from prison. Did people, when he got out, still think he was the letter writer?
Yeah.
He was very hurt, and he was hurt with what it did to his family.
A very uncivil war had been raging for years between Paul Freshour and his ex-wife, Karen Sue. Even their two daughters were divided over their dad, and caught in the middle was their son, Mark.
He was so loyal to his mom, but he loved his dad too. But with Sue, you were going to be her son or his son.
Pam Stanton says Mark chose his mom and never once visited his father in prison.
He wouldn't tell me why, he just said he couldn't.
It was Paul Freshour's gun discovered in the booby trap that helped land him behind bars.
He did tell some people that the gun had been stolen.
According to Martin Yant, Freshour strongly suspected that the thief was his own son.
And I did interview one man that said he specifically told him that he thought it was Mark, the son.
And this was before there was any talk of a booby trap.
Before the booby trap.
Freshour kept his suspicions about his son to himself, says Yant.
Family loyalty meant more to him, even though his son had totally rejected him.
Why didn't he say more? Why didn't he point the finger at his son?
Paul get his son in trouble? Oh, no, Uncle Paul never done that.
But he knew he would.
No.
He could go to prison.
I don't care. Uncle Paul would have died before he'd have seen Mark go to jail. All this destroyed Mark. The divorce, the letters, it all destroyed him in a way that could never be fixed.
Just before sunrise on September 11, 2002, in Portsmouth, Ohio, a man's body was found floating in the Scioto River. It was 39-year-old Mark Freshour, he had shot himself. His mother, Karen Sue, later told police her son had suffered for years from depression.
And I firmly believe when Mark took his life, he could not deal with the guilt any longer.
If Paul Freshour actually had nothing to do with the booby trap, is it also possible he had nothing to do with the letters?
As he told me, I didn't write the letters. I didn't do this.
Even after he got out of prison, he approached the FBI and asked them to investigate the case.
The FBI never responded, says Jant, but today, nearly 3 decades later, one of its former star profilers agreed to examine the Circleville Letters for 48 hours. Mary Ellen O'Toole has explored some of the darkest criminal minds, from the Green River Killer to the Unabomber.
Whoever the writer is, they're flying under the radar screen, coming across as very normal, and people would not suspect them.
Who was the Circleville writer, or were there multiple writers? O'Toole believes one solitary author churned out every letter.
When you have one person, and one person only, who has that secret, that person can take the secret to the grave.
Number one, do you think it's male or female? Can you tell?
Right. And I knew that would be one of your first questions. When it comes to a letter writer, gender is very difficult to discern.
That's because the writer was clever, consistently deceptive, and manipulative, says O'Toole.
You see the manipulation continue throughout these letters.
She went all the way back to the writer's first letters in 1977, hunting for hints about gender, and found some.
The letter writer kept referring to, I'm the boyfriend of a woman. They wanted to make you believe, I'm not a woman, I'm a man. And seeing how they were trying to hide who they were makes me think there could be a good possibility it's a female.
Altogether, O'Toole inspected 98 letters, finding the word choices and the grammar revealing. How educated is this writer, can you tell?
I would say this is not a highly educated person. Because of the quality of the sentences and how they were put together.
Significant, says O'Toole, considering that Paul Freshour had a job as a manager at Anheuser-Busch and a master's degree. She says there were other identifying clues from the anonymous writer.
And as you read these letters, you can see the letter writer is really having a good time.
What does that say about that person?
The letter writer is pretty callous, and this person would have to know, I'm hurting people, and that's okay with me.
A sign the writer might have been suffering from a personality disorder, says O'Toole, meaning that he or she knew the difference between right and wrong, but simply chose wrong.
So that would suggest to me that in their regular everyday life, they sought ways to be a bully, to be intimidating.
If that's the case, Pam Stanton says that does not sound like her Uncle Paul. Did he have a dark side to him or anything?
Never. Uncle Paul was never bitter, never angry.
Do you think the letter writer was Paul Freshour?
Right now, I have my doubts. Sitting here today, I'd say I can't rule him out, but I'm looking at other reasons that tell me it might in fact be somebody different.
And O'Toole does not believe the secretive writer would risk exposure by setting a booby trap in a public place.
That suggests to me that may have been done by somebody else who took advantage of this situation.
The mystery seemed to only deepen, but one expert is convinced she does know the identity of the Circleville writer.
100% sure.
Could there have been copycat letter writers? See the letters for yourself on Facebook at 48 Hours.
When the 1980 Robert Redford prison drama Brubaker needed extras in the Columbus area, Paul Freshour channeled his experience as a former prison guard to play one on the big screen. Little did he know he'd eventually serve a decade for attempted murder. And although never charged with terrorizing Circleville with the letters, he had to live with people believing he was the writer, but not sisters Janet Cassidy and June Whitehead.
What is one thing that you really want to see corrected?
I don't think Paul's guilty. I think he served those 10 years in prison. I don't think he was guilty of the attempted murder. And I don't really think he was the letter writer.
And with former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole believing the writer could be someone other than Paul Freshour, it calls into question the testimony of those two handwriting experts at his trial, linking him to the letters. So 48 Hours turned to forensic document expert Beverly East, looking for her independent analysis.
I don't want to hear the story because the documents tell me the story.
That story, says East, begins by identifying distinct writing patterns in Paul Freshour's known writing. In this case, letters he wrote to a friend.
The G in Grimmer is a very unusual G. It looks like a 6, a number 6.
And that's unusual?
That's very unusual.
She then studied a selection of 49 of the anonymous letters, spanning from when they first started in 1977 through the 1990s, and found that unusual G shaped like a number 6 in several of the Circleville letters, including one sent while Paul was in prison.
So Gillespie, Gettin, Gillespie, and Gordon, you've got that number 6.
He says numbers can tell a story of their own.
Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie.
Pointing to this zip code written by Paul, there's this ambiguous number 3 that might also be a 2.
It's like he's not sure if it's 42112 or 43113 in the anonymous letters on the zip code. I found the same mistake.
While East admits that there are writing patterns in the anonymous letters that don't look like Paul's, after showing us almost 100 examples of his distinct works that she was able to identify, she's convinced one person was responsible.
I would go into court and swear on the Bible on the evidence that I found.
And when you say you'd swear on the Bible, what would you say?
I would say one person wrote all of these, and the one person is this person.
Paul Freshour.
Paul Freshour.
And if you saw that a document examiner today thought, in fact, he did write those letters, would that change your mind?
No.
And there is historical basis for skepticism.
You know that some document examiners have been wrong in the past.
I cannot speak for others. There are always going to be times where people are inaccurate, and it's not because the science is not accurate, it's because that particular examiner has not done due diligence to arrive at the opinion that they should do. You can't be wrong, because somebody's life and livelihood is at the end of your opinion. So I am not wrong.
While studying the thousands of pages in the case file, Marie Mayhew made a discovery that supports East's findings. Investigators had found Paul Freshour's fingerprints on about a dozen letters, postmarked while he was incarcerated.
Those fingerprints are there, and they're his.
Do you think that Paul Freshour is the Circleville letter writer?
Yes, I honestly do.
Former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole says she cannot explain those letters, but she also cannot ignore that during Freshour's decade in prison, the phantom writer mailed hundreds of letters.
If a crime continues on and you have someone in custody for a long period of time, you have to say somebody else is sending these letters. They're not happening by magic. Somebody else is writing the letters.
If in fact Paul Freshour was the letter writer, is it possible that he mass-produced letters, went to prison, and then had somebody else send them while he was in?
Anything is possible. That would have to be investigated and ruled out.
Paul Freshour died June 28, 2012, at age 70, still fighting to prove his innocence. Instead, what's left behind is an unfinished portrait. Was Paul Freshour the successful, loving family man he appeared to be? Or a cruel, even dangerous criminal mastermind? Whatever your conclusion, Paul Freshour predicted, when interviewed by writer Robin Yoakum 35 years ago, that his notoriety as the Circleville letter writer would long outlive him.
When I'm dead and in my grave, people are going to believe I'm sending those letters. Unfortunately, Paul died, and we'll never know. We'll never know.
A modern-day Indiana Jones hid a treasure chest and left clues.
If you've been brave, I give you title to the gold.
But was the cost of the quest too high?
This treasure hunt did claim at least 5 lives.
If he could have stopped this madness, it wasn't worth it.
48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Mary Louise Day was a girl that lived in Seaside. In about 1981, she disappeared.
What do you mean she disappeared?
She disappeared off the face of the earth.
I just knew something was wrong in the house. Mary Day is my sister. One day Mary was in California, and then she was gone. Laying in bed one night with Kathy, I asked her, I was like, what happened with Mary, And she was like, shh, don't say anything. We're not allowed to talk about Mary. When I was 18, and I was like, now I can, go and try to find her.
It was a very hard case to deal with. Other than the family, nobody knew she was gone. It didn't seem to really concern them.
She started running away. You turn around, she was gone. You turn around, she was gone.
I've never seen a case like this.
My mother told me that there were a lot of places in California that you could bury a body and they'd never be found. I started believing she was murdered.
The dogs went into the backyard. We just had an indication from the cadaver dogs that there were human remains there. And our guys started digging, and my heart was pounding. We were looking for a little girl's body, and we found a little girl's shoe.
William told me that he didn't kill Mary Day, but his wife told him that he was possessed that night and that he had a demon inside of him.
I've never heard anybody say that before. This is a crazy case. Mary disappeared. No trace of her for 22 years.
And then what happens?
And then, when I got a phone call, he told me, hey, Captain, he says, you sitting down? He said, gotta let you know that they say that they found Mary Day. And I'm like, oh, this case just gets weirder and weirder.
Seaside, California detective Joe Bertina first heard the name Mary Louise Day back in 2002. He'd been asked to lead the investigation into her disappearance.
The case was a tangle of weaves that went all different directions.
Mary was 13 years old when she vanished in 1981, seemingly without a trace.
There was no evidence that she was alive.
Joe's boss at the time was Steve Circone.
Not a trace of her as an adult. No Social Security record of her having a job, getting welfare benefits. We have nothing on this person's identity.
She didn't exist.
She didn't exist.
Mary's existence came close to being completely erased. There's no record that her stepfather, William Hoole, or her mother, Charlotte, had ever reported her missing.
It's hard to believe allowing a child to walk away or a child go missing and it's not reported.
I can't remember a time when a child was not reported by the parents.
I couldn't understand how a mother could not go to the ends of the earth to find her child.
It was this woman, Sherry Calgaro, Mary's sister, who finally got authorities on the case.
I wanted to know what happened to my sister Mary.
Sherry was 10 when Mary went missing. As an adult, she filed a missing persons report and told the police about Mary's troubled childhood.
The information we have through the sisters is that it was a very dysfunctional household.
In their early days, Mary Day, middle sister Kathy, and Sherry were in and out of a foster home. Their mother could not take care of them. Sherry was adopted by the foster family.
We were separated when I was 6 years old.
Mary and Kathy were returned to their mother, Charlotte. By this time, Charlotte had married William Hoole, and the couple had 2 kids of their own. Hoole was a soldier. The family moved around a lot from base to base. At one point, detectives say Mary's stepfather had been reportedly physically abusing her.
Children's Protective Services had taken custody of Mary. She was eventually turned back over to the family. In my opinion, the system failed.
At the time Mary disappeared, Hoole was assigned to Fort Ord on the California coast north of Monterey.
They were living in Seaside, which is kind of a military town at that time. And that's where she was last seen.
Sherry, who kept in touch with her birth family, later visited them.
When I went to visit my family, I asked them what had happened to my sister Mary. Kathy was like, shh, don't say anything. We're not allowed to talk about Mary.
But Kathy did say her mother Charlotte told them Mary had run away.
At the time, I wasn't sure what I thought, except that it didn't make sense to me.
When Sherry grew up, she filed that missing persons report. By the time Seaside Police launched its investigation in 2002, there was little to go on.
The neighbors barely recalled the family living there. Nobody really knew this family, and they sure didn't know Mary Day.
Mary had never been enrolled in school in California, and her parents never told anyone she was gone. Bertina says they had at least one reason to keep quiet. Mary had been getting government checks because her birth father had died in an accident.
They were taking Mary's Social Security checks, cashing them.
Detective Bertina, it's March 3rd, 2003. Raw camera.
Bertina went to the Seaside home, Mary's last known whereabouts. He brought Kathy with him.
Pictures used to be there of all of us.
Kathy was just 11 when she last saw her sister.
That day lives in my head a lot. It feels like you're opening up a scab, you're opening up, and it hurts. I need Mary right here. This is Mary's and mine.
Mary was at home along with Kathy when the rest of the family went out. They came home later that evening, and while they were gone, the dog became sick and was dying in the kitchen area. When William saw that, he immediately accused Mary of poisoning the dog.
He started yelling at us, and I got scared. All hell broke loose. This is the corner where he was hitting her, and the fight was back here. I can hear her yelling. There's nothing we can do.
He hit her.
Last time I saw her, she had the blood coming down her mouth.
Kathy said after Mary disappeared, her parents ordered the kids to stay away from one particular area of the backyard.
I'm not supposed to come over this far.
You weren't supposed to come over here? Who told you that?
My father.
The clues were adding up, and detectives felt they could be dealing with something much more sinister than a runaway teenage girl. They brought in a team of cadaver dogs, dogs trained to find human remains.
As the dogs went into the backyard, they each hit on one particular spot near a tree. We started to dig. As a father, my heart was pounding. And as we dug, I saw a little girl's shoe. My heart started pounding even more. And I thought, here we are. We found her.
In 2003, the missing persons case of Mary Day was quickly becoming a homicide investigation, with police facing the grim task of digging in the dirt where the cadaver dogs alerted.
And we kept digging. And there was no body. I said, well, it must be here. And they kept digging.
They were sure that a body had been there.
They were positive. They said, you know, our dogs don't lie. And 4 of them independently hitting on the same spot before we dug. The dog handler said, it's been moved. At this time, There was no question that the parents were the suspects in the possible homicide of a little girl from 1981. We knew that we had to find the parents.
They found them in Kansas. It was more than 20 years after Mary disappeared. Her stepfather, William Hoole, had left the Army and was now at a Kansas prison working as a corrections officer. He and Charlotte were still together. She agreed to talk with local detectives about the daughter who vanished so long ago.
You don't have whips and chains, do you?
Oh, absolutely not.
I remember watching the interview and realizing that she had something to tell us.
You know, life is full of regrets. If you go back and say, you know, if I had did this and this and this.
Her body language and then her sinking down in her chair and saying words to the effect of, you know, sometimes you do things in your past and it comes back. I knew that there was something there.
When's the last time you heard from Mary?
81, the last time she ran away.
Charlotte said Mary running away was no big deal. She did it all the time.
Oh, what a mess. It was like trying to get a nightcrawler out of a wormhole, just grabbing it, it was gone, grabbing it, it was gone. I mean, how many times did she run away? You know, all these questions I can't answer.
Okay. When you was back in California, did you guys take any kind of steps to find her?
We should have. We should have.
But you didn't.
My husband said we filed a police report with the Salinas Police Department. If we did, I don't remember.
There is no record of a report.
I couldn't understand a parent, number one, not reporting their child as a runaway, but number two, treating this case, the status of their missing daughter, as basically no big deal. It didn't seem to really concern them. They were not really surprised at us being there.
Detective Bertina later questioned Mary's stepfather, William.
I just asked him, tell me about the last time that you saw Mary. He told me that, well, he was going room to room, checking on the kids, and he discovered Mary wasn't in the bedroom. He told Charlotte, she panics, he panics, called the police. And he knew I wasn't buying that. I said, William, she runs away all the time. Why did you panic? I never got a good response.
The detective pressed Hoole and brought up the story of the sick dog.
And he said 5 or 6 times, you know, she did. She poisoned my dog. And I was really angry. She tried to run out of the house. I didn't want her to go, so I caught her before she got out of the front door. She was kicking me, punching me, so I pushed her. And when he's doing this, he's making a...
The choking?
Yeah, gesture. He's, with his hand, and it's like a hand strike that I've seen before. It's a martial art technique. So I asked him, where did you hit her with that? And he said, well, in the upper chest. And I said, could it have been the throat? He said, well, it may have slipped off and hit Mary in the throat. I wanted to know on a scale of 1 to 10 his anger when he had done this, when he had struck Mary. And he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, I was a 15. I said, you're this angry, I think you may have killed her. And he looked at me and said, no, I didn't kill her. But the next day, my wife Charlotte told me that that night she saw Satan in my eyes. And she said I was possessed by a demon. And then it dawned on me that he's admitting but not admitting that he killed her. And I said, okay, William, I believe you. You didn't kill her, but what about that demon inside of you? Could that demon have killed Mary? And he looked at me and said, yes, the demon could have killed her.
When he walked out, did you think you were letting a killer go?
Yeah.
Joe said, yeah, we don't have a body, but he said, this This guy came so close to confessing that it was as close as he's ever had anybody come.
Is that enough to go to a prosecutor and say, I don't know if we're ever going to get the body, but we have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle?
Yeah. The DA wasn't ready to file at that time.
Did you think there was enough?
I thought there was probably enough. I was not worried, really, because I thought we are building the case here.
And then, just as the detectives' confidence was growing, the case took an unexpected turn. Remember, police had no record of Mary Louise Day as an adult. There were no credit cards, no driver's license, or ID recorded anywhere. There hadn't been a trace of Mary in more than 2 decades. Until police in Phoenix, Arizona made a traffic stop.
I got a phone call. I was at home. I left work, and he told me, hey, Captain, he says, you sitting down? And I said, what happened? He said, no, he says, just gotta let you know that Phoenix Police Department in Arizona pulled over a car, and they say that they found Mary Day.
What do you make of William and Charlotte's stories? Hear Charlotte's unusual response to police searching for her missing daughter on Facebook at 48 Hours.
November 2003, Phoenix, Arizona. It was a routine traffic stop. A pickup truck with stolen plates. When police ran the IDs of the passengers, one of them hit. A woman named Mary Day.
He said, Joe, guess what? Mary Day's been found. And I was stunned.
Investigators had put Mary Day into a missing persons database long ago.
She identified herself with a Phoenix identification card, or Arizona state identification card.
Back in California, Detective Joe Bertina felt like a ghost had just appeared. In his mind, Mary Day had been murdered more than 20 years earlier at the home of her parents.
You talked to William and Charlotte in April of 2003.
Yeah.
And then 7 months later or so, a woman named Mary Louise Day just falls out of the sky.
I was stunned.
His boss, Steve Circone, could not believe it.
Joe went down there, and he met her, and he sent a picture of her, and we went, what? Wait a minute. No, all right. It looked like it could be her. And I said, wait a minute, all these other bits of circumstantial evidence?
The father almost confessing to something?
Almost confessing to the murder of a little girl.
And now, here was this woman 700 miles away with a valid Arizona state ID. Strangely, that ID had been issued only 3 weeks earlier, while the homicide investigation was underway.
Well, you must have found the timing awfully suspicious.
Yes, it was very suspicious.
When Detective Bertina went to Phoenix, the woman he was sure had been murdered told him she had run away from her mother, Charlotte, and stepfather, William, when she was a teenager. She'd basically lived under the radar and by her wits ever since. But she seemed hesitant, and her story seemed sketchy. Later, in a phone call, Mary told Bertina she had some awful memories.
Did you want to talk about what happened that last night?
It hurt.
I'm sure it does, but what happened that last night?
I'm so confused anymore. I don't know what's real or not. I remember you kept ramming my head into the tub and it hurt.
Is that when you started bleeding?
I was already bleeding and hit my head into the coffee table. I think I blacked out. Maybe that's why I can't put all the pieces together, tell you.
But she didn't remember anything about the sick dog.
Was that troublesome to you?
That was, yeah.
Investigators say it was hard to pin down much of anything about her past 2 decades. They began to wonder if the woman with the freshly minted ID was really who she claimed to be.
You refused to call her Mary Louise Day.
We called her Phoenix Mary.
In phone conversations, Phoenix Mary was sounding increasingly frustrated.
Can I throw one question at you if you don't mind?
Go ahead, Mary.
If you would have found my body, how was you going to be able to prove who the hell I was?
DNA.
Oh, so since I'm still alive, y'all can't prove who I am?
There's no record of you ever being anywhere. It's like you haven't existed up until now.
So it'd be better off if I'm just dead, and then y'all can do the testing from there.
I said, all right, let's get a DNA test on this woman. Let's let her prove that she's the daughter of Charlotte. We're going to disprove that she's Mary, of course, because there's no way that her DNA is going to match.
Except it did match.
I nearly fell on the floor. I couldn't believe it. The DNA came back positive to being a daughter of Charlotte.
The case was closed. Sherry invited her long-lost sister to move in with her. In most cases, that would be the end of the story, but not in this case.
So now DNA matches,
Yep.
case closed.
Yeah, well, if it were that simple, right?
Once Phoenix Mary moved in, Sherry started to have her own doubts.
The first thing I noticed was it sounded like she had some weird Midwestern Southern accent. It's weird to me.
The detectives had noticed that too.
That's an interesting dialect you have, Mary.
What do you mind?
I don't know if I've ever quite heard that particular manner of speaking.
So y'all still trying to prove who I am, huh?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Phoenix Mary also said she never used her real name.
So nobody knows me as Mary. I gave that name up years ago.
What name would they know you by?
Monica Devereaux.
It's a name she said she made up.
I did notice that she had magazines in the name of Monica Devereaux.
Sherry's sister Kathy was also unnerved.
No, that's not Mary.
Why? What makes you so sure?
Something's off.
You're telling me that your gut is saying it's not her.
My gut.
She says the woman claiming to be Mary didn't even remember that their birth father left them an inheritance they could collect at age 18. It was their shared escape plan, and they had a code word for it.
Was there a code word or some sort of secret between you and Mary?
Yeah, it was. It was called Mohawk.
Mohawk was your secret word?
Yep.
And Mary did something else strange. She wrote a note to Detective Bertina.
She emailed Joe, and her email said something to the effect of, I've been lying to you about who I am. And that was new information. Oh my God, I said, oh, this is a whole new ballgame.
Still, the case remained closed. But then in 2008, Steve Circone, now Seaside's police chief, got a phone call from investigators at the Army base in Fort Ord. Another set of cadaver dogs had been working on an unrelated matter and had found something.
Fort Ord was a huge place, and he said, look, we brought the cadaver dogs out here, and they went over hundreds of homes, and he said, we got a hit on one of the homes. You'll never believe who was living in this house. He said, William Hoole and his family lived in this house.
In 2008, cadaver dogs alerted near a second home where the Hooles had lived, the house they had moved to shortly after Mary disappeared.
So what are you thinking, that a body has been moved by this family from one location to another?
Yeah.
Once again, police dug, and once again, they came up short.
Was Mary moved twice? Was this little girl who may have been killed back in 1981, was her body moved twice?
Although the case had been closed, Circone felt something was seriously wrong.
I don't know. I don't know, but we have to investigate this.
he hired Mark Clark, a retired homicide detective from nearby Salinas, California.
Absolutely the most bizarre case I've ever come up against.
Reviewing the evidence collected over the years, Clark was convinced there was a murder and missed opportunities.
There's so many parts about this thing that could have solved this case back then that is really frustrating.
He believes they let the parents off the hook too soon.
Mom and Dad say she ran away, don't ever talk about her again. They tore up her pictures, threw away her clothes, and that was it.
Most damning, he says, are William's own words.
His comment was, I couldn't have killed Mary. My body would have done it, but it wouldn't have been me. It would have been that demonic personality because I blacked out.
Clark says he would have arrested William Hoole.
You just admitted tantamount to a homicide and we're letting you go.
Clark also focused on that shoe detectives found. Another detective asked Kathy about it.
They first asked, did you guys ever wear canvas tennis shoes? And Catherine said, Keds? And she said, yes. And he pulled out the shoe, and it's pretty chewed up, but you can tell that it's a tennis shoe with a canvas body to it. And she said, exactly that.
And he consulted with the Body Farm, a renowned research facility that studies what happens when bodies decompose. He says they found soil samples consistent with a body being buried.
What do you think happened to Mary Louise Day?
She was killed in 1981, and probably around July.
Clark believes the woman now claiming to be Mary Day is an imposter.
There's just too many things that point to Phoenix Mary Day being somebody else.
But what about that DNA test showing she's Charlotte Hoole's daughter? Well, Mark Clark has a theory that he says explains it all, even if it is a little far-fetched. He says Charlotte Hoole had another daughter, a secret daughter, born before Mary and given up at birth. Clark believes Phoenix Mary is that secret daughter. So you think Phoenix Mary is the actual sister of Mary Louise Day, who goes missing back in 1981?
Yes.
He looked into Charlotte's background.
There's some circumstantial evidence that Charlotte had a couple of marriages where she would be involved in extramarital affairs and become pregnant from those affairs.
Clark says the Hooles could have reached out to Charlotte's secret daughter when they felt they were in trouble.
I believe she was somehow sought out by Charlotte and William to pose as Mary Day to avoid prosecution.
It was an elaborate plot, he says. The Hooles knew that police were investigating Mary's disappearance, and they asked her secret sister to assume her identity. Circone says the Hooles had the wherewithal to do it.
What if they took the birth certificate of Mary, which they probably had, and the Social Security card for Mary? What if they gave those cards to the other sister and said, you're now Mary?
Clark says the scheme put an end to the investigation and also put money in Phoenix Mary's pocket.
There was an inheritance. We thought the motivation would be the inheritance because she could collect that inheritance.
With accrued interest, that inheritance was now worth roughly $60,000. Sherry helped Mary get her cut. We reached out to William and Charlotte Hoole. Through a relative, they said they had no comment. Mark says the imposter theory accounts for a lot of inconsistencies. For example, Mary's odd Southern accent.
The accent was really thick. Sherry and Catherine both said that Mary Day never had an accent.
She has a Southern accent. It's a pronounced Southern accent.
Can I throw one question at you if you don't mind?
Go ahead, Mary.
If you would have found my body, how were you going to be able to prove who the hell I was?
Mary did claim that she had spent some time in the South as an adult, but was only there briefly as a child when experts say it would have given her that accent.
And I let 4 separate Southern dialect experts listen to the interview, and they all concluded that it would have taken living her formative years up to 9 or 10 in the South to acquire this Southern accent.
And there was that email that Phoenix Mary sent, saying she wasn't who she claimed to be. After about a year of living with Sherry, Mary moved out on her own. But the mystery just wouldn't die. Another detective was about to take a crack at the case.
We have to be very careful, all of us in law enforcement, not to make our story fit our ideas or what we believed happened.
In 2017, Sherry Calgaro still wanted answers about the woman claiming to be her sister.
Basically, everyone that's ever met her has a lot of doubts. I have my own doubts.
We took Sherry to visit Phoenix Mary in Missouri, where she'd been living for a few years.
I'm hoping that she will admit, she will confess to us who she really is.
Okay, good luck.
Bye.
Mary was living here and suffering from late-stage cancer. She wasn't up for any more visitors that day. As Mary's health was failing, the new acting chief of Seaside Police was determined to solve the case once and for all. Judy Velaz chipped away at the idea that Mary Day was murdered. For starters, additional tests showed Mary's DNA matched not only Charlotte, but also the birth father. And then there was that little girl's shoe.
I put it in the palm of my hand, and I mean, it fit in the palm of my hand. It was very small. I had a hard time believing that a 13-year-old would have to be, I mean, I saw her stature in the picture. She wasn't that short.
Velaz also traveled to Mary's home. She says Mary herself filled in the gaps.
She wanted to convince us she was Mary, and it seemed sincere.
Mary said she began calling herself Monica when she ran away because she didn't want police to take her back home. Mary also mentioned a new name, Maury, a woman she knew in those early days on her own in California. Velaz tracked down Maury Kimmel.
I got her when she was 15. Very naive and innocence about her, almost like childlike.
At the time, Maury had 2 young daughters of her own.
She just won my heart, and my girls loved her.
You know that may have been the only and the best family life she ever had in her entire life.
I'm realizing that now, you know. I wanted to nurture her, you know.
But after about a year, one day, Mary was gone.
I was heartbroken.
Velaz discovered that Mary had moved around a lot, city to city, living on the margins.
Honestly, when I talked to her, she just seemed like a survivor.
She also solved the mystery of why Mary suddenly got that Arizona ID. She needed state aid to pay for surgery.
She had her gallbladder taken out that led her to obtain her proper driver's license, or ID, in the name of Mary Louise Day.
A local nonprofit had helped Mary track down her real birth certificate. Velaz chalks up Mary's foggy memory to trauma and a lifelong battle with alcohol.
Those gaps in memory, to me, can be legitimate, especially if someone's been an alcoholic from the time they've been a teenager.
As for that email Mary sent to Detective Bertina saying she'd been lying about who she was, Velaz says Mary sent a follow-up email writing, quote, "I'm not sure myself what I was trying to say in that email."
Again, from someone who is still a severe alcoholic and using.
And then Velaz came up with the smoking gun. One of Maury's relatives had a photograph.
The picture really did it.
It's Mary, she says, and it was taken at least a year after the alleged murder. We took the photo to TrueFace,
See it? I see this.
a state-of-the-art facial recognition company. CEO Sean Moore.
So we're going to look at the results of our face matching algorithms on the images that you all sent us.
Okay. And it's trying to see what?
It's trying to see the probability that we're matching a young picture with one of the older pictures. So
If this is the same person.
Correct. It's a probability that it's the same person.
The top photo is Mary before she disappeared. The other photo is the one that Judy Velaz dug up.
What are the numbers telling
And
you?
the numbers are telling us that it's the same person.
He says that's a 99% probability. With that photo, Judy Velaz submitted her report and closed the Mary Day investigation. This time for good. After all these years, the woman at the center of this case finally agreed to meet with me. This is the Mary that I met. Fragile, but not feeble. It was clear from seeing her in person that this was a woman who had not had an easy life. Still, she didn't seem to be trying to hide anything. In fact, she said, it's very frustrating trying to prove who you are when there is no proof. Sherry is finally at peace.
Was all of a sudden it felt like I had a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was just like, it's done. This is her. And that's pretty much the end of that story.
It's not that simple for Mark Clark.
I've seen the report. I'd be lying if it didn't make me second guess my investigation.
Even though he can't prove his theory, he can't quite shake his old hunch that Mary is an imposter.
Do you believe that William Hoole murdered Mary Louise Day?
Based on the evidence I've found, yes.
As for Steve Sircone,
I will admit that once I read Judy's report and I saw that picture, I definitely leaned towards the identity of Mary as being Mary Louise Day, the little girl that we were looking for.
still, he says, he is certain of one thing. Those cadaver dogs were on to something.
They were positive.
Positive.
Positive. They said, you know, our dogs don't lie. They don't lie. But who was buried in those grave sites?
Do you believe that the woman claiming to be Mary Day was really her? Hear more about investigator Julie Velaz's meeting with Mary at 48hours.com. Known as the Doomsday Mom, her 2 children murdered.
Lori started referring to her children as zombies.
Inside the Lori Vallow Daybell trial, how the jury found her guilty. 48 Hours, Saturday on CBS.
Listen to the My Life of Crime podcast with me, Erin Moriarty.
I think Forrest wanted to become a legend, and I actually think he succeeded. He was described as a modern-day Indiana Jones. Forrest came up with the idea to hide a bronze chest filled with gold somewhere in the Rocky Mountains.
I bought this beautiful little treasure chest, and I started filling it up with wonderful things. There's 265 gold coins, hundreds and hundreds of gold nuggets.
He wrote a 24-line poem guiding people to the location of the treasure.
Yeah, that's exactly it. He created effectively a treasure map in the form of that poem.
I'm going to read the poem. So here it goes. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold,
I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old.
There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high.
So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you've been brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold.
And I read that poem, and oh God, it was like a hook. No place for the meek. The bug got in me, and I couldn't let it go. I tried to climb up into that cave there. I couldn't sleep.
I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard.
How much was that treasure worth?
I think that 1 million is a pretty good mark to use.
I made at least 85 trips.
I didn't find the treasure yet!
We had so much fun, it was crazy.
Since there's a mountain lion in the area, we don't want to take any chances, so we're bringing our gun.
I have spent over 2,000 hours
This is where I ran into my rattlesnake.
searching for Forrest Fenn's treasure.
Well, I made it hard deliberately. If it was easy, anyone could do it.
For at least 5 people, the search for Fenn's treasure was the last thing they ever did.
Yes, unfortunately, this treasure hunt did claim at least 5 lives.
Randy Bilyeu was the first. Harris Wallace also died in the Rio Grande River. Eric Ashby died in the Arkansas River. There was a gentleman who was hiking in Yellowstone and ended up falling off of a cliff. 2 men who went out with snowmobiles.
I've got him in sight still.
One of them froze to death, and the other one was hospitalized.
Forrest Fenn was a bad person. He could have stopped this madness before it became what it became. It wasn't worth it.
How does Forrest Fenn respond to that?
By, to some degree, digging in his heels. He didn't like the idea that anyone would tell him to bring his hunt to an end because of a few deaths. And he said that if somebody was murdered because of the hunt, that would probably be too much.
High atop a ridge near Dinosaur National Monument, 53-year-old Mike Sexton froze to death. This is the last known photo of him, taken in March 2020 as he hiked in that remote area. Days later, Mike's body was airlifted off the mountaintop.
Hey, he's coming up. All right, he's about halfway.
Mike became the 5th person to die while searching for Forrest Fenn's hidden treasure.
Mike was full of life. Mike was an adventurer and always smiling, always laughing, a big, deep chuckle.
Friend Liz Key struggles to reconcile Mike's love of adventure with his terrible loss.
I'm glad that he took this adventure. I am very sad that he's gone.
I miss Mike every day. I miss his hugs when I'm stressed. I miss his support. I miss his voice, his laughter.
Beth Van Oss today is forced to cope without her longtime boyfriend. Mike had been her rock after she suffered a brain injury.
He was more than just my partner. He was, in some ways, my caretaker.
After Mike's death, Liz felt compelled to send Forrest Fenn an anguished email.
How many people have to die before your game is done? I'd receive an email back, and he just gave his condolences to Beth.
Forrest Fenn was a very complicated person.
Dan Barbarisi explores Fenn's complexities in his new book, Chasing the Thrill, Obsession, Death, and Glory in America's Most Extraordinary Treasure Hunt.
He believed in stories that were bigger than just your run-of-the-mill standard tale, and he dreamed big. He believed in big things.
And Fenn had lived a big life, beginning with his days in the Air Force when he was shot down twice in Vietnam, and later as the owner of a well-known Southwestern art gallery. How did a retired fighter pilot reinvent himself in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with not just an art gallery, but one of the most famous art galleries in America?
I think he would tell you it's about the show you can put on.
And there's no question that Fenn put on a good show. His gallery attracted celebrities like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Steve Martin, and Ralph Lauren. But there were recurring whispers that Fenn may have built his impressive collection by plundering ancient Native American pueblos.
There were certainly some questions about how he came in possession of some of those artifacts over time.
In 2009, long after Fenn had sold his gallery, his home was raided by federal agents from the Bureau of Land Management.
And it ultimately turned out that Fenn was not charged with anything in that case.
The next year, Fenn self-published his memoir, The Thrill of the Chase. To get families into the great outdoors, Fenn put a little incentive inside his memoir, that distinctive 24-line poem. He claimed it contained clues that would lead one clever person to the 10 by 10 inch chest of gold he'd hidden somewhere in the Rocky Mountains.
If you can follow the clues in the poem to the treasure chest, you're going to be amazed at what you find.
Fenn launched a modern-day treasure hunt, but it was slow going at first.
It felt like a small little treasure hunt for a few people who knew about it.
When did that change, and why?
It got noticed by the larger media. There were a few big pieces, one in Hemispheres magazine, one in Newsweek.
I think the name of that reporter was the same as my name.
Whatever it was a very hard name to pronounce, but I'm pretty sure it was Tony. That much I've got.
It's pronounced Decopal, by the way.
It really started to raise the profile of it in a significant way.
It wasn't long before tens of thousands of people were on the hunt. In 2015, months before any of the searchers died, Fenn spoke to CBS News about the likelihood of anyone finding his treasure.
It isn't impossible, but you're not going to stumble over it. You have to deliberately go to it.
Fenn said the spot he chose was so beautiful, he could imagine it as his final resting place.
The original version of the poem actually talked about his bones being there next to the treasure chest itself.
Fenn dropped that idea. The searchers had their own reasons for going on the hunt, and it became clear that many were seeking more than a box of gold.
I think a lot of people really wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Maybe there was something missing in their lives, and for others, it was that they felt that people hadn't believed in them to the extent that they should have.
Searchers shared their passion and began to compare so-called solves, their interpretation of the clues in the poem. It was all online until some got the idea to meet in real life.
And so of that was born Fennbaree. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a Forrest Fenn jamboree.
Each summer, Fenn's fans flocked to Santa Fe, where Forrest Fenn was their star attraction.
I think I described it as meeting a Beatle, you know? It was that kind of thing. Everybody just lined up literally to get their brief moment with Forrest Fenn.
People use the word eccentric, but I don't think that's the right word for him. He was just his own man.
Sasha Dent was living in Albuquerque when she took up the chase.
I probably searched for Forrest Fenn's treasure about 300 times.
She became an insider.
Forrest was such a major part of my life.
And Sasha saw firsthand the good that came from Fenn's game.
There was account after account of families who were brought together because of Forrest Fenn's treasure hunt. There were relationships built on the treasure hunt and marriages.
And that includes her own marriage.
You gotta breathe in, breathe out all the beauty.
Another of Fenn's favorites was Katia Luce, a singer-songwriter who knew Fenn in the 90s before he wrote his memoir. When she later came across Fenn's book, well, gold fever struck that very night.
I couldn't sleep all night long. I'm either Googling, reading the book again, underlining, highlighting.
She estimates she spent $75,000 over 7 years of searching. It was a great time, she says, even during some dangerous moments.
I had a very close encounter while I was searching for the treasure with a cougar. And I just froze, but then I lifted up my hoodie really tall and made myself bigger. I went marching really strong and did like a pseudo chant really loud. Hey, oh yeah, yeah, hey, 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 hey.
Katya came away unscathed, but others were not so lucky.
This is not some Disney-fied hunt where at the end of it, everything turns out okay. The reality is if you don't take this thing seriously, it will get you.
Look just to the right of that tree off in the distance.
I see it.
You see
Yeah,
it?
I
That's
see it
where
right
we're going.
For 5 years, no one could find the location of Fenn's treasure, but the searchers had become a tight community.
If it's snow covered, it's pointless, I think.
We were like a support group for each other.
You're among people who get that it's not just about the money.
He says it cannot be stumbled upon.
It's about being the one who cracked the code.
I have looked and I have looked and I have looked.
And the other people, they get it.
I know at least probably 30 places where it's not.
You would talk about your solve, as they called it, but you never gave the exact location.
I told you we're not going to be in Yellowstone. The distances didn't work out really well for me.
Toby Eunice hosted a popular YouTube show about the hunt.
Everybody believed they were going to find their treasure. There was no acceptance of the idea that someone else would find the treasure.
And divorced grandfather Randy Bilyeu was convinced he had as good a chance as anyone.
I met Randy a couple times at some of the Fenn gatherings.
Randy was always my protector.
Randy grew up on Long Island, New York, and his sister Kathy Liebold remembers he loved sports and animals. Randy learned of Fenn's treasure in 2013 and started searching the next year.
I think he was excited about the adventure of the hunt, and he thought if he found the treasure, that he would use the money to help his family.
And if you knew Randy, you knew Leo, his long-haired Jack Russell.
Leo was his best buddy, and he took him everywhere.
Randy and Leo moved to Colorado to be closer to the search area. And at the beginning, Kathy says, he was good about letting his family know when he was going out on the trail. But later, that changed.
I think he thought he was getting really, really close to it, and he just wanted to, excite us all with the news that he had found it.
On January 5th, 2016, Randy and Leo headed out to the Rio Grande, northwest of Santa Fe, with a small raft. Temperatures hovered around freezing. He was gone for 10 days before he was reported missing.
I had a sinking feeling that something was really very wrong.
Flight nurse Erin Johnson was part of a medical helicopter crew sent out to look for Randy. On the initial search, they found nothing and headed back upriver.
And that's actually when we found his raft.
It's a raft. It's blue.
They landed on a sandy bank of the river and were in for a surprise.
There was a small dog that was there and barking at us. He had a sweater on, which was pretty dirty, but I'm quite certain that that sweater saved his life. There were 3 of us on the ground the whole time. Aside from the raft and his dog, we could find really nothing else. No backpack, nothing.
Leo seemed frightened, but Erin eventually coaxed him to eat a Cliff Bar the pilot had on board.
And at the point where we had to leave, I had a big, thick jacket, and I just threw it over him and scooped him up and brought him on the helicopter.
Kathy saw the heartbreaking news on TV. Only Leo had been rescued.
It was probably one of the worst days of my life.
The treasure hunting community got word of this, and many of these people wanted to help.
Determined to find Randy's body, drone pilots shot hours of footage that was posted online so the treasure hunt community could go through it frame by frame, looking for signs of Randy. Other searchers put boots on the ground.
It was rugged. I mean, it was harder than any treasure searching any of us had done. It was rough.
We searched very, very hard every day for over a month. Forrest Fenn rode in a helicopter to look for Randy.
Fenn also met with Kathy when she came to Santa Fe. Fenn was sympathetic, but told her he wasn't willing to call off the treasure hunt.
I think a lot of people could argue that his priorities are perhaps not what they should be, that instead of the people or the human cost, he cared a lot more potentially about his treasure hunt.
And the treasure hunt was everything to Fenn, even though it put his family at risk.
Forrest was harassed over the years. His family was harassed. There's a man who's done prison for stalking Forrest's granddaughter.
Get on your knees. Get on your knees.
And this man, Robert Miller, was arrested for burglary in 2018 at Fenn's Santa Fe home.
So what the hell is going on?
I thought the poem directed me into here. I thought it said...
Poem?
Yeah, the treasure map, the treasure hunt, you know.
So you came on the property because of a poem? Are you serious?
Yeah.
What did his family think about all this?
I think his family had a hard time with it, honestly.
Even with all of that, Forrest saw how much good his treasure hunt did for how many people. And he knew that the good far outweighed the bad.
The search for the treasure continued, as did the search for Randy. 6 months after he went missing, his body was found on the riverbank.
Obviously, we were devastated that he wasn't alive. He was a great father, grandfather, and uncle to my son.
With Randy gone, Leo was adopted by none other than Aaron Johnson,
Leo!
the nurse who rescued him.
Good boy.
In the 5 years with his new family, the ultimate rescue dog has even learned some new tricks.
Okay, turn around.
Kathy is happy he's found a new home,
Good boy.
but she thinks about her brother every day.
I wished he'd been more careful. I wished he hadn't gone out that day. But, you know, he was enjoying what he was doing.
Randy was not the last to die searching for Fenn's gold. The next year, the hunt claimed 3 more lives.
He had become obsessed by Fenn's treasure, and that was the only thing that mattered to him.
In June 2017, a year and a half after Randy Bilyeu died, 3 more men lost their lives in a matter of weeks. Jeff Murphy was searching in Yellowstone National Park.
Very tragically, just misstepped and ended up falling off of a cliff and passing away.
Around the same time, writer Dan Barbarisi went on his first search with his treasure hunting partner, Jay Rayner.
What was it like going from 4 months of research on a computer to being out there in the wilderness?
The first thing that stood out to me, how much bigger a point on a map is in real life. You know, you look on a map, oh, this isn't that big. I can cross this area with just my finger alone.
Once you're actually out in the wild, you see how big those distances are and how much land there actually is out there pretty quickly. It really hits you in the face pretty fast.
Reality wasn't the only thing hitting Dan and Jay in the face.
We're out there thinking that we're, adventurers, explorers, and all of a sudden it starts hailing, and we very quickly realized that we had absolutely no idea what we were doing.
Days later, in that same exact area, a Colorado pastor named Paris Wallace set off to search the Rio Grande near the Taos Junction Bridge.
As you move through life, there are those points where you have to seek God to find out what He wants you to do.
And he crossed the river by himself, and it was high waters then.
Paris's body was recovered 4 days later, a few miles downriver. His death spurred the New Mexico State Police Chief to ask Fenn to call off the hunt. Fenn refused.
There was a huge amount of anger at Fenn over this. I mean, you can understand why. I mean, this is a treasure hunt. It doesn't need to exist, and yet he wouldn't stop it even after multiple people had died. That's a pretty hard stance to take.
Fenn justified continuing the hunt by pointing out that any outdoor activity came with risks.
In the summertime, we jump in a swimming pool. But if somebody drowns in the swimming pool, should we drain the pool or should we teach people to swim? That's the way I feel about it.
And the treasure community rallied around Fenn in support of the hunt.
Here I go.
99.9% of people who go out looking for his treasure make it home safely with tons of memories and new experiences to treasure.
And Fenn did keep warning searchers to be safe.
Be more careful. Be more mindful.
He constantly reminded everyone to not go anywhere a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go.
Many searchers, Dan says, set off on the treasure trail with great excitement, but sometimes were unprepared for how wild the wilderness can be. Searchers like Eric Ashby understood the risks and were willing to take them.
Fear was not part of his game. He didn't know how to be afraid.
Paul Ashby raised his son Eric as a single father in the mountains of Tennessee. Eric grew up playing sports, riding motorcycles, and was taken by the quest at the center of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Eric was a great kid. Everybody who knew him loved him.
In 2016, Eric moved to Colorado. He told his dad he was headed west to take part in his own quest, Fenn's Thrill of the Chase.
He became obsessed. Dad, I can do this.
Was he motivated by the money the treasure represented or by the recognition, solving it?
Oh, sincerely, the recognition. The money to him was totally irrelevant.
Eric told his father he was going out to search the Arkansas River outside Canyon City, Colorado. More than a week later, Paul got a phone call from a woman who said her name was Becca.
She told me on the phone, Mr. Ashby, your son is drowned. And she says, I'm sorry, Mr. Ashby, your son is dead. And she hung up.
Becca turned out to be Rebecca Nyes, who had worked with Eric. She and 3 men were with Eric at the river, and they had drawn up this contract outlining exactly how they'd split the treasure. She later told police what happened that day.
He said he had swum the river that we were about to cross 10 times before, and so, we figured, though, we should be fine.
Becca said they'd bought a 2-person raft, but Eric got in alone and had no life preserver.
So he just jumped out. It looked like he had made it to the rock, but then we didn't see him anymore, and that was right where the rapids, would have taken him.
Becca told police 2 of the men went downriver to look for Eric, where they saw a photographer who told them he'd called 911. The photographer also captured this photo of Eric's empty raft. Hearing someone had called police, Becca and the others went back to their car and went home, a decision Becca tried to explain.
I want to know why no one stayed there to tell us this information, because, again, now I'm back in.
It's easy in hindsight to see what we should have done, but in the moment, we had never been involved with anything like that.
Eric stepped in a situation that was impossible. Nobody could have done it. The thing that makes it worse is that nobody stopped him, and that it was just a case of, oh well. Eric was worth so much more to me than, oh well.
After Eric's body was recovered, Paul traveled to the river to see where his son had died.
I took the excursion train that comes down the gorge, and one of the company managers was on the train with me, and he went into the bar, the lounge car, and come back with a beer. He says, "This is for you and your son." And we shared our last beer right there.
Paul says he never heard from Forrest Fenn.
If you had been able to reach Forrest Fenn, what would you say to him?
Say, Mr. Fenn, is this something one day you're going to have to go to whoever our maker is and say, yes, these people were drowning or dying, falling off cliffs, whatever, and I could have stopped it, and I chose not to.
I was honestly surprised that it didn't end in that summer of 2017.
But the hunt did not end. And in March 2020, a fifth man died.
About 2 o'clock in the morning, I looked up, the stars were out, I looked over, to my left, and there was Mike. It was like, oh, I remember telling myself, oh no, Mike.
What do you think of Forrest Fenn's decision to continue the treasure hunt? Learn more about the search for the treasure at 48hours.com.
Mike was the kind of guy that walked into a room smiling and made everybody feel better just by coming around.
Beth Van Oss says her longtime boyfriend, Mike Sexton, knew about Randy, Jeff, Paris, and Eric, the others who died while searching for Fenn's treasure.
I think Mike knew of the danger. He just maybe ignored a little bit of it or thought he could get around it.
It had been nearly 3 years since any searchers had died.
I think people thought that maybe they had gotten past that point where people aren't going to die anymore looking for this.
Mike was convinced he knew where the treasure was, along the Colorado-Utah border in Dinosaur National Monument. He made nearly a dozen trips there, but he needed someone with a four-wheel drive truck to help. That's how his poker buddy, Stephen Inlow, got involved with the hunt.
I was very excited to be with Mike on these trips. I just enjoyed traveling with him.
This is the first time Stephen has spoken publicly about their ordeal that began in late February 2020. The men rented snowmobiles in Denver and set off for Mike's spot.
The snowmobiles proved to be too heavy for the depth of snow that we had.
Mike and Stephen got stuck, but managed to call 911.
Is anybody injured?
No, we're not injured. Just stuck.
Looks like I've got a pretty good location on you. I'm going to get you some help headed your way, okay?
They were rescued, but the close call didn't deter the pair from going back out just a few weeks later, on March 17, 2020, days into the COVID pandemic.
Mike was adamant that he wanted to make another trip before the quarantine started.
Mike and Stephen drove to Salt Lake City, where they rented snowmobiles they thought would be better on the terrain. On the second day in the wilderness, they left their truck 5 miles from the main road and headed off for a day trip on the snowmobiles.
We left a lot of our provisions back in the truck, thinking we were just going to be gone 3 or 4 hours. We take off the snowmobiles, and we're on the south side of the mountain this time, and we ran out of snow. It became dry.
They left even more supplies on the snowmobiles and set off on foot with a sled to carry home the treasure, which Mike believed was close.
We had some candy bars, a couple of energy bars, and maybe a gallon and a half of water between the two of us. It didn't look that far away, but it proved to be ridge over ridge over ridge that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take.
By 6 o'clock on Wednesday, I was kind of nervous. I hadn't heard from him.
When the men hadn't returned the snowmobiles Wednesday night, the rental company called the police, who called Beth and Stephen's wife.
Not knowing was just the worst, just the most awful thing.
Mike tried to hike to higher ground to get a cell signal, but hours later returned unsuccessful. At that point, both men were so exhausted, all they could do was lay where they were. The next day, it began to snow. They had no more water.
I remember my hands and knees eating the snow crystals, and blood was dripping from my mouth, staining the snow. I cried for help. I asked God, I asked Jesus, just anyone, call 911, we need help.
Desperate for hydration, Stephen began drinking his own urine and felt warmth spread throughout his body.
And I could just feel that was a moment that I'm going to live. And I told Mike he's got to quit eating the snow when he was shivering, and told him what he needed to do, and he said he'd rather die. On Friday, we could hear helicopters on the other side of the mountainside, and we knew they were out searching for us. And so that gave us hope, but we never saw the helicopter. That night, I woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Mike was about 6 feet away from me. He was on his hands and knees with his arms cupped around his head flat on the ground, and he had no shirt on. And so I knew he had died, and I knew why. Hypothermia.
People suffering from extreme cold can feel hot in the moments just before they die.
I remember telling myself, oh no, Mike.
Later that Saturday, Stephen heard the helicopters again, louder this time, and saw them down in the canyon below. With all the strength he could muster, he grabbed the orange sled and he waved it toward the helicopter.
And then, just like in the movies, the helicopter rose up above the cliff, and I knew I was saved. And I passed out. Next thing I knew, 2 guys were picking me up, asking me if I could walk. I couldn't even stand. And I just remember whispering, "Goodbye, Mike."
Mike was later taken off the mountain in a body bag. Beth got the devastating news that afternoon.
I mean, you can say I love you, but until somebody's really gone and you can't say it anymore, you just don't realize you have more than that to say.
A year later, Beth and Mike's friend, Liz Key, find solace in that last photo.
His
Big
grin.
smile. The look in his eye of,
yes,
this is where I want to be. I am very sad that he's gone, but I'm glad that he did what he loved to do.
Mike was the 5th person to die seeking Fenn's treasure. He was also the last, because only 3 months later, Forrest Fenn made a stunning announcement.
The message was very short and simple. It said, "The treasure has been found."
Early last summer, just as thousands of treasure hunters were about to begin looking yet again for Forrest Fenn's chest of gold, they got a piece of news that left them reeling.
My heart stopped, honestly. I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe this has actually happened.
Did somebody really find it? Or, and if so, who?
The news broke on June 6, 2020, when Fenn made the stunning announcement in a brief post he sent to a blog used by the searcher community. Fenn wrote, "The treasure has been found and had not moved from the spot where I hid it more than 10 years ago. I do not know the person who found it, but the poem in my book led him to the precise spot." Overnight, the gold rush that had sustained the searchers was over. And many were left feeling a bit cheated.
We didn't have a name. We didn't have where it had been found. We didn't have any other information other than it had been found where he had left it.
And is it really, really, really true that they found it? I want to see, So the guy did send pictures.
For the first time, searchers could see Forrest poring over the contents of his famous treasure chest.
It looked pretty authentic to me, very authentic.
But like everyone else, Katya yearned to know the finder's solve. How had he deciphered those clues in the poem? The finder wouldn't say, but a month later, Fenn revealed the treasure had been found in Wyoming. Then, 2 months later, on September 7th, 2020, Forrest Fenn died at his home, where he had just turned 90 years old.
I find myself thinking of Forrest often, and I miss our conversations very much.
The finder may have remained anonymous forever, except for a lawsuit that required the Fenn family to reveal his name. The finder knew it was only a matter of time, so he came out to Dan Barbarisi, who wrote an article for Outside Magazine.
Who did find the treasure?
A man named Jack Stoof found the treasure. And he was, a medical student who had gotten obsessed with this chase around 2018. He, was very, very committed to his solve.
Hey guys, this is Jack.
In this online message to other searchers,
our challenge is to try not to make guesses.
Jack Stoof had shared his approach to cracking Fenn's poem.
It is simple and clear and straightforward. You need simplicity in your solve.
Dan says Jack had been searching for at least 2 years. And then one day in a Wyoming forest, Jack says he uncovered the chest. It had almost been covered by leaves and debris, but Jack said the lid was still visible.
He became very paranoid that somebody was going to stumble upon him in that moment.
Jack says he hightailed it to Santa Fe, where these photos were taken. They seemed to back up Jack's story, but Fenn watcher Toby Eunice was skeptical.
Here is my theory. The hunt was moving forward. Forrest was aging. The family, Forrest's family, was frustrated with the state of the search. Their houses had been broken into. Their children had been threatened with kidnapping. They were never lovers of the Forrest Fenn treasure hunt.
Toby has no evidence but believes that Fenn, knowing he had only months to live, looked around for someone who was close to finding the treasure. Toby believes Fenn reached out to Jack.
But I imagine this is how it went. I want you to know that I'm dying. I want you to know that I don't want to leave this treasure hunt to my family, and I'm going to ask you for a favor. Forrest had a saying that he used often.
There's an old saying, 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead.
Jack refused our request for an interview, but denied he had any help from Fenn. As he wrote online, I am not and was never employed by Forrest, nor did he pick me in any way to retrieve the treasure. I was a stranger to him and found the treasure as he designed it to be found.
I do not believe it is part of a conspiracy engineered by Fenn to give Jack the treasure or anything else of that sort.
Dan is in a unique position because he's the only journalist who has interviewed Jack. Jack even allowed Dan to examine the treasure. These photos have rarely been seen.
You were able to actually hold the treasure, to touch it, to see it in person.
Yes, I have seen and touched and felt and gone through the chest. It was kind of an incredible moment, honestly.
Jack told Dan he will not reveal the exact spot where he found the chest because he fears it would become a tourist attraction that would ruin the area's serenity and natural beauty.
I think we will never find out truly where it was found.
And there could be another reason. Fenn's original intent to lay down and die at the very spot where he hid his treasure.
I don't want to be buried. If I had my way, I'd lay down under a tree and just like a big old buffalo lays down and dies. Go back to nature, become part of the earth again.
Jack says he offered to put Fenn's ashes in that special spot, but will not say if the family accepted his offer. Dan says he doesn't know what Jack intends to do with the treasure, whether he will sell it piecemeal or as one, or perhaps lease it for display.
What is, in the end, the legacy of Forrest Fenn?
I think the legacy of Forrest Fenn is extremely complicated. I think that there were a lot of good things that happened because of it. There were also some really bad things that happened because of it.
But if you're Paul Ashby, who lost his only son Eric to the hunt, one of the 5 men to die chasing the thrill, Fenn's legacy is not complicated at all.
He was reckless. He was willing to ignore the fact that people were dying because all these other people worshipped him.
A lot of people still do look up to Forrest Fenn, And maybe that's not so surprising.
When you feel a dream, live your dream out, follow your heart. And okay, so I didn't find the treasure, but I found many treasures. This in itself is the biggest treasure of all that I've found. So many magical, wonderful things I could never replace without that treasure hunt. I'm so grateful for Forrest. Thank you, Forrest.
CBS next Saturday. 48 Hours brings you back-to-back episodes all summer long. This week, killer contestants.
He is the serial killer that we always suspected him to be.
You just want to wake up and have it not be real.
48 Hours Crime Time double feature next Saturday, 9/8 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.